What is this? Is this what we've come to now? How much lower can Hollywood stoop at this point? No, studio executives, that was not a challenge. I would have made a video on remakes in response to this teaser if I hadn't already done that. Please go check it out. But today I just want to take a quick look at what is going on in Hollywood and why it's such a problem. But before I get into it, I'm just thinking out loud here, so if you like my brain bomb, you know where the like and subscribe buttons are. So without further ado, let's dive into it. I was inspired to make this video when I watched a recent upload by the Storytellers Guild, one of my favorite channels, about the decline of massive franchises in the last couple of years. I won't be reiterating all of his points because he already made his argument better than I could, so go check out his video after this one. But he made one particular point that I really wanted to elaborate on, that being Hollywood's reliance on nostalgia to keep its franchises alive. Nostalgia is an interesting thing in entertainment. It can be a powerful way to get a quick reaction out of your audience and can make a lot of money, but it's not a substitute for quality storytelling. For example, let's look at Deadpool and Wolverine for a moment. I made a video not too awfully long ago about quality in storytelling and whether or not it can be objectively measured, in which I mentioned this movie and said that it did what it set out to do pretty much perfectly and thus pleased its intended audience, which should be commended. However, that does not mean that studios should view this movie as a model for long-term success. When Deadpool and Wolverine came out, tons of people hailed the film as the salvation of Marvel Studios, just as Deadpool himself claimed to be in the film. But since its release, what's changed? Are people even still talking about it? As far as I can tell, everyone had a good time in the theater, went home and dressed up as Deadpool to dance along to NSYNC on TikTok, and then pretty much forgot about it. Don't get me wrong, it was a tremendous success, and the reason it was received so well is something Disney should look at, but I also fear they're likely taking all the wrong lessons from it. See, fans loved the movie because it loved the fans, something you wouldn't think would be so rare nowadays for films relying on built-in audiences for their success, but it was quite refreshing at the time. It was a love letter to the last couple decades of Marvel films and those who loved them, but that's also all it was. So while I hope Marvel can learn from the movie's attitude towards its audience, I also hope it recognizes that this kind of movie is not a sure foundation upon which to build a franchise. For one thing, movies like Deadpool and Wolverine and Spider-Man No Way Home before it were so successful because they're so novel. They're seen as once-in-a-lifetime experiences, but the more common they become, the less impact they're going to have, and they're going to be less and less successful over time. But beyond that, the joy these experiences give their audience is so much more shallow and fleeting than the joy of a riveting and emotional story. Think back to when you saw No Way Home in theaters, assuming you did, unlike me. If you're a big Spider-Man fan, you probably cheered when you saw Tobey and Andrew pop onto the screen. But first of all, you only experienced that excitement because you've seen and loved every previous Spider-Man movie of the century, meaning that experience was relying on your nostalgia. In other words, relying on other movies to have any weight. So you could argue the film doesn't have any real substance of its own. It does no work to earn any emotional reaction. The experience is entirely dependent on the audience having existing feelings built by previous films that this one rides on. And second of all, I bet you haven't really had any emotional reaction to seeing that moment in the film on a rewatch. Now it's just there. You'll remember the experience you had your first watch, but it was a one-time thing, and the film itself won't be remembered as much more than a fun one-time experience. Once it happened, no one will ever again watch it and appreciate it like it was appreciated in that theater. And that's the cost of relying on nostalgia. Compare that to an exciting or emotionally satisfying moment in a standalone film that is a result of building the audience's investment in its characters. That moment will have just as much weight on every viewing, whether or not the audience grew up watching a bunch of other movies made before it or not. Of course, this applies not just to Marvel cameo fests, but to all sequels, spin-offs, and most especially, remakes. The fake live-action Lion King was a novel experience that made a lot of money because its audience grew up on the original and was curious to see what it would look like in photoreal CGI. But no one watches that anymore. It's the original we all still love and remember, because it's the original that had a heart of its own, that had a story to tell. The new one was little more than a ludicrously expensive photocopy, and that's exactly what the new How to Train Your Dragon is shaping up to be. Let's face it will likely make a ton of money, but no one will remember it like they'll remember the original, because the original is, well, the original. This is just a quick and easy cash grab because studios have learned we'll pay for what we know we already love if they give it a new look. Nostalgia has taken over the industry because it's proven successful in the short term, but it can't sustain Hollywood forever because all it can do is milk our love for what came before. It can't offer anything new, and the more this trend dominates the box office, the more creativity will stagnate, and the less we'll see timeless masterpieces worth passing on to future generations. Don't believe me? Look at Disney Star Wars, where, with the exceptions of Rogue One and Andor, the best received productions are the ones that remind the audience the most of the past, when the IP actually stood for quality. Well, most of the time. Even when the new content is passable now, even when the audience enjoys it for its fan service, it's still the originals that we always go back to, because they're the ones that said something, that did something new, that had a voice and a reason for existing. Now, before I wrap up, let me reiterate. Stories built almost entirely on nostalgia may be well made and enjoyable if done well and respectfully, with some amount of heart of their own, as with Deadpool and Wolverine or No Way Home, and I'm not saying they shouldn't exist, but they'll never last in the cultural consciousness because they don't have much to offer besides a reminder of other better things from years gone by, and they'll end up leaving a stain on entertainment history if we let them replace genuine storytelling. These stories we remember through the decades are the ones that stand on their own 2 feet. After all, the only sequels people really remember are the ones that are incredible stories in their own right, without relying more than necessary on the original, like Terminator 2 or Aliens. Nostalgia can make money, but you can't build something people will love and cherish for years to come based on it, because all it does is remind you of something else you liked more. And that's why we are sick of Hollywood now, because that's all it seems to be capable of doing anymore. The good news is that this isn't sustainable. The more we lose original storytelling, the less original stories there will be to rip off. And the more Hollywood plagiarizes itself to death, the less their nostalgia bait will pay off for them. However, if you want this trend to end sooner rather than later, if you want to see the return of genuine original storytelling to Hollywood as soon as possible, show them. Don't pay for cheap nostalgia and instead seek out good original stories, because Hollywood just chases the money, and if their tricks stop paying off, they'll be forced to change tactics. Fortunately, it seems to be working as franchise films have been failing left and right, so let's hope Hollywood finally gets the message. But that's just my perspective on the state of Hollywood at the moment. What do you think is the biggest issue here? Is reliance on nostalgia the real problem? And what do you see for the future of Hollywood? I look forward to continuing the conversation with you in the comments. In fact, these videos are really just meant to kick off a discussion with you down below, so please join me there. Until next time, never stay silent.